Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.96, and this is our section 5 wrap up video. Section 5 was all about synthesis, sound design, and really just getting familiar with how the various instruments work within Bitwig Studio. So we didn't really have too many lofty goals at the start. It wasn't like by the end of this, we're going to be able to program any bass sound that we've heard before in our lives, because really that would defeat the purpose and kind of goes against the whole idea of sound design to begin with. I think that sound design should be replaced with sound exploration, because that's really what this is all about. Okay, it's one thing to just know what all those knobs do. It's another thing to get in there, start from scratch, and build something that you never expected you were going to come up with. There are times when you need to shoot for a certain goal or make a particular sound, but it's not until you've explored and experimented that you're going to be able to do that consistently. And that's something that I genuinely believe. So as we go through this document, we'll be talking more about what we covered in section 5, but we also need to talk about where we're at in this course in general. And we're at a kind of important point now. So if you started at 1.00 or 2.00 in my course and have worked your way through it, I would hope by now you feel very comfortable working in Bitwig. You may not be an expert or a master at single thing, but you should be comfortable with the logic, and you probably felt very comfortable with navigating and moving around after just a few hours inside of the software. That's really all it takes. If you're a first-time user to any digital audio workstation, which I hope some of you are, then it will take a bit longer, but that's all part of the growing process, and it really is just one super long process. You can't think that the first time you open it up, you're going to be able to make a really great piece of music, or make a piece of music that you might be really inspired by, because it just takes a really long time to kind of get familiar with all of these things. And there's really no such thing as an expert or a master or somebody who's certified in a software. I always think that's kind of silly and kind of funny, because really at the end of the day, the software has to work with you as an artist, you as an individual, for your process. And what I've done is I've just tried to show you all of the functionality and all of the different features, and you take what you want to use and you discard everything else. That's totally cool. I would love if somebody got really wrapped up in just working with those little editor parameters that we have at the audio clip stage, like the pitch and the stretch and the gain, and you just get so deep into that you spend months just exploring those different features. And they seem so basic and they seem so simple, but those are some of the most powerful sound design tools we have of all inside of Bitwig Studio. But going back to what I'm talking about with being comfortable inside of the DAW, for any artist or any producer even, the first thing you need to do is get yourself comfortable and familiar with working in any particular software. And that's true for like painters and artists. When you're learning, you need to be comfortable. You need to feel like, okay, I understand this guy. I know the logic. I know how I can navigate around, get to one place to another, add new audio tracks, blah, 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 blah. And then you're going to be able to open up the program every day and you're going to have fun. When you're still in that initial learning stage, it's like learning how to walk. You don't always want to try to walk because you're scared of what's going to happen next. And it's the same thing when you're working in something like Bitwig Studio. You have to learn how to walk. You have to enjoy the process of being able to move around before you start to run and just go wild with the software. So my guess is that if you've been going through my course by now, you are extremely comfortable with the program. But one thing to be aware of and to always consider is that with art especially, once you start to get too comfortable, you're going to want to do something different. And you have to do something different for your art to stay fresh and to stay fun. A number of producers fall into the trap of making music on a very much a repeatable scale. So they have a process, they follow that process to the T every time because they know it works. So it's like, I'm going to use massive to make my bass patch. I'm going to make my bass patch now. I'm going to work at 168 BPM. And they follow this almost like a recipe and they don't waver from it. And there's a reason why people who produce EDM kind of have a much shorter shelf life than people who are making experimental music and they do it their entire lives. Those people doing the experimental music are constantly getting outside of their comfort zone and doing new things. Not one way is right than the other. I'm not saying all of you guys should get into experimental music because I know that that's not really, in today's age, something that people get excited about. However, I will say that if you're always willing to experiment, to do things different, to alter your process, to not get too comfortable, I think it's going to help you out quite a bit for the long term. And when I say long term, I'm talking 30, 40, 50 years, not 2 or 3 months. So, speaking of being comfortable in a DAW and wanting to do something different, why I moved into Bitwig. We're going to talk about this quickly, and I'm sure we'll cover this at another point too at the very end of this whole thing. Number one, I like that they are a small business, and I consider that for every single plugin or anything I buy. Usually, when businesses start out small, they care a bit more about their consumer. They're not so concerned with the profit margins and dividends and all of that stuff. So, as long as Bitwig remains a small core group of people, I'm going to be happy because I'll always feel like they're going to listen and they'll actually take the feedback that they get. At this stage, I feel like they have to listen to their users because their numbers are not that great. I feel like a lot of people have tried the program out, but my guess is at this point, even there might be 200, 300, probably not more than 1,000 people who work day in, day out inside of the software. I open up this software every day and do a number of different things in it. And I do think I'm in the minority in the greater, producer, creator realm of people. And also, I work with their built-in stuff. A number of people seem to use Bitwig and they're just kind of using it as this host to drop in all of their plugins. And I think, well, there's no reason to upgrade or buy a new piece of software if you're just going to be dropping plugins. If that's what you're going to do, then buy Reaper and just because it's the cheapest and use Reaper for all of your plugins, or use GarageBand, which I think supports plugins as well. I also think that our feedback at this point, it means something to them and they kind of have to take it. Now, unfortunately, at this exact stage, the number of people who are transferring over, there's a much greater curve of people trying to make the move from one digital audio workstation into Bitwig as compared to brand new people into the world of music production. So what people are requesting and asking for and begging for over and over again are not things that I would be requesting or begging for, because they're things to make these people who are already producers make their lives easier, make it so that it's more like the DAW that they were already working in. So having the VST routing and having the ability to group tracks and some of these things that, to me, yeah, they are important, but I don't want them to follow along in this really producer-centric mindset and not actually think about what their DAW is and their philosophy behind making it. And so I personally hope that they will do things and add things for the sake of learning. Number one, that's a biggie. So some of like the spectrum analysis tools, and also continue to leave it so open so that people can create for the sake of creating. And that's important for people just starting out. Okay. I really can't stress enough how important it is to just be experimenting in here and not worrying too much about what comes out the other end. And I think that this is the sort of digital audio workstation that was going to, or that will eventually hopefully make its way into classrooms for kids at public schools, elementary, middle, and high school, because it's such an open and simple and kind of intuitive platform that I don't want them making things easier for people who are already just kind of cranking out stale productions or who already have a really set process in mind. I think that this is a great DAW for somebody who's 8 years old or somebody who's 98 years old, because it has the kind of intuitive and simplicity in its use and in its devices that anybody could get in here and make sounds relatively quickly. So my second reason for moving into Bitwig was I was kind of getting bored with Live, and I also just really don't like the layout of it just visually. And that seems like a silly reason, but that was another reason why I actually moved over to Bitwig. If I wasn't bored with Live, if I wasn't frustrated by that, I'd probably never have moved over in the first place. So it is a shallow reason, but it's an important one, because if you are making music every single day, the look of what you're working in is actually very important. Number four, I should say, I believe that this is the DAW that can make the music creation process accessible and fun for everyone. So that's what I already said before. And I kind of hope that that's what they keep in mind with what they decide to add into the future. We know that at some point they're going to try to make it so that we could set something up where we could work together online and I could make something and you could be anywhere else in the world, and we could both be working on the same project and hopefully communicating either via chat or with audio. And that would be something awesome. I think that's another great sort of education based update that hopefully they add soon. And for me, making the move, it had very little to do with the instruments, the samples, or the features, although, being able to use this live is a big plus. But I knew that no matter what, I was going to try to figure it out. And I am a firm believer that no matter what you have, you can make something really interesting. And the digital audio workstation, I want you to think about it as just kind of the border, not the whole puzzle. It's up to you to fill in all the rest of the details. The DAW is just that framework. You still ultimately are the one who is controlling it, not the other way around. And it really is all about listening when you come down to it. If tomorrow all of the knob names were replaced by just numerical numbers, so instead of the chorus saying mix, time, delay, amount, LFO, if those were just completely erased or changed to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you would have to really force yourself to listen, and you would train your ear, and your sense of hearing to some of those subtle changes would be absolutely insane. And I think we really take for granted that we have all of these names, and so, okay, we associate the sound with this name, but really, those are just names. They don't mean anything. It's about how it's changing the sound. And for sound design specific, that's very important. It's about listening, about hearing those nuances. That way, when you find yourself in a situation where you have to recreate a sound, you can do it by yourself. You can do it because you've trained your ear. Classical musicians go through ear training exercises every single day. And I think for us as electronic and computer musicians, we need to force ourselves to kind of do the same thing, or at least just try to actively listen as much as possible and not get bogged down by names and assuming that something is going to happen a certain way. Because if you have that name there and you do make the change, your brain's going to try to anticipate that what you're expecting is going to happen. And that's not what we want. We want to turn it and just close our eyes and hear the subtleties and the nuances so that we can take that knowledge and then the next time we open it up, apply it in some kind of way. So you don't need to get caught up in what things are named or how they work, I think, except for the basics of sounds, harmonics, etc., unless you want to. And I think we've kind of gone down the assuming you want to know some of the math and the science behind these things. But that's really not important. I don't want you to get distracted by that. I want you to focus on making music and just coming up with sounds, whether or not you know the math behind it or the logic to it. So on to sound design. In my opinion, sound design, which is what we've been talking about this section really, is an art form akin to painting, sculpting, filmmaking, etc. And the producer-centric times we live in today, I think that we look at sound design a little bit differently. It's like sound design has to have a purpose. You need to be making a bass sound. You need to be making a lead sound. And what we're really doing is just designing sound. There doesn't have to be an end goal that we're striving for. We're just hearing the sort of things that we can come up with. And I think like any art form, it does take a lot of time to practice and hone in on your particular skill set. And this is especially true to working in the DAW with computer music. So what you need to do is find that aspect that you really like and what you prefer to do, play to that strength. Maybe it's designing sounds in the polysynth. Maybe it's coming up with really basic sounds out of the FM4 and then using really complex effects chains to do crazy things and manipulate your sound. Maybe you're really good at drum programming. Whatever it is, focus on, play to those strengths, but also be sure to practice your weaknesses. And I don't always do this as much as I should. I'm not too great at like drum programming or chopping up vocals and some of these things. And those are things that I should personally be practicing more. And if you can, always sit down and think, okay, what are the parts I really love? Write down the things you really love. What are the things I really hate about working in the DAW, not just in general, and jot down those things that you're not so good at, and then just practice them. You don't really need to have tutorials guiding you through anything. Just go in there and do it yourself, and the more you do it, the better you're going to get. Let's also remember that sound design is usually about 50% like the instrument, and then 50% processing, modulating, etc. So that's a biggie. There's another kind of sound design misconception is that it's all about the synthesizer you're using. And that's just not true. It goes so far beyond that. And in the sounds that you're hearing today that you might be trying to recreate, you're going to really struggle to just do it inside of the synthesizer. You're going to have to process things further, and then you're going to have to process them further again. And in the stage of making music, at least for like popular EDM and anything you're hearing on the radio, it goes through so many different phases and gets manipulated so many times. So if you are trying to recreate a sound, if you just come close, you should be very happy with coming close, because getting something exact is just not possible in this day of age. We've looked at the processing part earlier in this course, so that wasn't what we focused on in this section. This section was all about the instruments themselves. However, the strength of all of this is taking what we looked at when we talked about processing and combining it with these instruments. That's how you as a sound designer are going to get stronger. And before you move on to bigger and bolder synthesizers, which, I think everybody wants to do at some stage, we're all human, we like the new toys, but I want you to still try to see what you can get out of the tools you have access to. Again, it's frustrating to see so many people working inside of Bitwig and pulling from all these different plugins. And I mean, that's kind of the way things go today, but I wish people would spend a little more time exploring what they have access to and seeing what they can get out of those tools. However, if you do buy something, you better freaking use it. So I understand if you've bought like some VST synthesizers, you should definitely use them. The E-drum and the organ, this is more of an example, they're very simple at face value. But when you take something like the E-kick, like I did for that one composition as your source, and you can only use that, it's amazing the sort of things you can come up with. When you force yourself, you back yourself into a corner, it's great to see what you can do. So I always encourage that you do things like that from time to time. Just experimental compositions, just challenge yourself. This is where you get better as a producer. It's not in necessarily going through your formulaic process again and again and again. It's when you do those things that you're uncomfortable with. That's how you're going to get stronger, because the next time you go in for that formulaic process, instead of doing the exact same thing, you might say, I was able to make this really crazy effects chain and it had this really eerie sort of effect that I want here in this track. Maybe let's try to recreate it here, and I won't go and use those same tools I always do. Respect and assume that all your instruments are capable of an unlimited number of timbres. No instrument is inferior, and if you are a sound designer, you will always be able to make do with what you have. I think that a lot of times people take something like the E-kick or like the E-hat or the E-clap and they assume, this is only good for one thing. This can't make that many different sounds. I'm not even going to use it. I'm not even going to look at it. It's too easy for me. You can't do that. You have to respect every single thing that you bring in and assume that if this was the only thing I had on a desert island, I could make a full track with it. I could make a pad. I could make a lead. I could make a bass. Might require a lot of work, but you can always do it. And that's where being a good sound designer really does come in. Like, I would be shocked to see what some of these big name EDM producers do with something like just the E snare. I bet you all of them could do really interesting things, but it might be a bit of a struggle because they've gotten so used to using these other tools that they wouldn't really know what to do for a little while. That being said, time to contradict myself. There are some really cool third-party instruments out there, and when you are stuck in a creative rut, I think that's a great time to look around, demo around, consider buying something else. But my own piece of advice is, if you do commit to buying something, which be sure to do plenty of research, try a demo, see if it's something you'd want to use every single day. When you do buy it, force yourself to make a few compositions using just that instrument. Number one, to learn that instrument better. And number two, to validate yourself for buying it. So that would be my own piece of advice to you. You can take it or you don't have to. It really doesn't matter. And I think if you can appreciate and marvel at the process of creating and manipulating sounds, then the result of those sounds at the beginning won't really matter that much. And I was lucky enough where that was kind of what was instilled in me. And so the majority of sounds that I make have no place in any composition. They just get wacky, they get out of control. I apply too much modulation, just sounds like crap. But I'm still able to sit back and kind of go, wow, did I really just start with a sustaining sine wave, just a basic sine wave on gate, and that's what came out of this? And I know, for example, when I plug in an analog synthesizer, I go, oh my gosh, is voltage really doing all this? Is voltage capable of making sounds like this? How crazy is that? So I always think that if you can just kind of appreciate the process of what's happening, you don't have to get discouraged at yourself when the results aren't exactly what you're going for. So, a word on presets and things. I think presets are totally fine. Feel free to use them if it means that you're actually going in and making music. Okay, just shifting through presets for 2 hours isn't super useful, but if you're shifting through presets for 30, 40 minutes and you find something that's really inspiring to you and it gets you to make a whole track, more power to you. Feel free to do it. But realize that when you're scanning through your presets and you're not actually working with the synthesizer, that's kind of taking away 50% of the joy of the whole sound design process. However, there are a number of cases where if you have to preset scan, feel free to do it. And that goes to the bigger picture here. And I think that you should learn in whatever way works best for you. If you can figure out the best way that you learn personally, you can really go so fast and you can put in so much information to your head. So in my opinion, if watching someone make a bunch of sounds helps you the most, that's what you should do. If deconstructing presets helps you, that's what you should do. If just starting from scratch and turning knobs helps you, do it. If trying to recreate sounds that you like or that inspire you, do it. If just having a rough idea of like what you're going for, a bass, a lead, a pad, can get you going and working inside of the instrument, feel free to do it. Whatever works for you, that's what I want you to do. So I think more importantly is figuring out how you learn the best and then embracing it and going in that direction. I know a lot of times I've been told that you should take something like a preset that's close to what you're looking for and then like subtly change it so that you get exactly what you're going for. And that's one of the things that I just could never do, and I still can't do it. I have to start from scratch. If I don't start from scratch, I'm just not happy for whatever reason. But that's me personally. And there are people that I respect quite a bit and who are really good at this stuff who have kind of given me that sort of advice in the past, saying, take a preset, and then manipulate it and mold it to where you want to go. But that doesn't jive for me. However, it might jive for you. And just like for me, watching other people make sounds doesn't really help me at this point. It might help you. And if you think it's going to help you, feel free to do it. But remind yourself of why you're doing all of this in the first place. Remind yourself, if your goal is to be a creator, a producer, whatever, that's still what you need to spend the most time doing, even if the results aren't what you're looking for at this point. Okay, hope that's been helpful for you guys. I've shown you the tools. Now it's up to you to make the sounds. And really, it's up to you to just get in there and get going. We've talked about pretty much every single thing inside of Bitwig Studio that I can think of. Maybe I've glossed over something, but as far as I know, we've almost touched every single control, every single parameter. And, I think it's been a lot of fun. We're going to be moving into some different things in the next section, a different sort of skill set that might appeal to some of you more than others. But as far as Bitwig version 1.00 or 1.014, that's all there is to the program. So it's been a lot of videos. I hope you feel comfortable, and I hope you have a lot of fun making music. Thank you so much for watching, and you will hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.